invite the next speaker of this panel, Sukumar Ganapati from Florida International University. And Professor Ganapati will talk about divergence in smart cities between Europe and the United States. I'm sure there are differences because there are differences between smart cities in Europe and smart cities in Asia or Middle Asia. So we have divergences, and I'm convinced that there are also divergences between Europe and United States in the term of the smart cities. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, how about I start with saying that there are no smart cities in the United States. That could be a good kind of a controversy to start off. Well, in a way, that statement could be true. I do get a lot of applications from across Asian, European, as well as Latin American students that they're interested in smart cities, studying smart cities in the United States. And then I have to look at it quizzically because we don't have a smart city policy at the national or the state level. So that's where some of this conversation starts to become happening. So I teach in the Department of Public Policy and Administration, and this is at a much kind of a more abstract, political, and less of a technical conversation as compared to both of the conversations we've had earlier. And this is at a much larger level of how these conversations are happening in the United States versus what's happening in the Europe. And I hope there is some kind of value in that conversation. So I'll go into what some of those big concepts, conversations are in terms of US and EU smart cities, looking at how these smart city dimensions happen across the United States and Europe at a very, very broad aggregate level. It's not at the individual city level. And then looking at, again, the broad brush of how these differences manifest themselves at the governance, the planning, the innovation models of how these smart cities emerge. And then look at a few key challenges which are happening both across Europe as well as the United States. So if we look at some of the very conversations happening on what are smart cities. So let's start with the smart city indices themselves, right? If this is a list of the top 10 smart cities from two of the folks that do these kinds of indices. You can look at them with a little bit of a quizzical eye. This is not necessarily the be all and end all. But having said that, there is this kind of a conversation which is happening as to what these are as smart cities. And you can see from the IMD side, which is based in Zurich, none of them are in the United States. From the IESC side, the three of them, again, you might question whether New York really is a smart city. DC, is it really a smart city? San Francisco, yes, maybe when you get off the airport, you can feel it. It's tangible. It's right there. It hits on the face. You walk around the city, there are way more cars, which are self-driving cars all around. But again, the question remains, is San Francisco a smart city? When we look at it in terms of what smart city is, more broadly, there are these kinds of various dimensions which we talk about in terms of smart mobility, smart environment, smart people, smart living, smart economy, and the smart government, right? It's kind of the different dimensions on which we evaluate or think about smart city. And again, these are not necessarily the end of the conversation in terms of the smart city dimensions, but the main idea is that smart city is not just technological. It's all about people. It's more about integration of the people into this. But technology is the core focus. And if you look at it from an American perspective, it's only about 15% of the smart cities in there. And what do they focus on in terms of the smart is the mobility dimension, like the Waymo cars, right? The self-driving cars, these are technological innovations which happen, use of drones, the GPS and the GIS kind of technologies, which are again facilitated because there is a lot of technology. There's a lot of data, there are a lot of sensors which are set up across all these places. A lot of these smart cities in the United States are also driven by what Silicon Valley does. Silicon Valley wants to demonstrate what its value is across these places, and therefore you have these kinds of innovation and tech startup systems. It's a very, very market-driven approach, and that we cannot lessen in any way. It's all about how there is a partnership between a private sector agency, be it Google or Microsoft, or even we're talking about ChatGPT, how that's adopted into the smart city framework. It's not about the city itself. It's about that particular private sector partnership. And again, a lot of those focus, if we see, is on those operational efficiencies of either in terms of mobility, how we get from point A to point B more efficiently, or how we conserve energy, and so forth. So it's all about efficiency, which also, again, in the era of what we are living in with the Department of Government Efficiency, that is one of those pieces that comes into play. And this is where the contrast with the European, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in many of these, is you have a lot more of these happening in a much more policy level, not at the individual player level. And there's a lot more of a focus on the environmental side, which contrast, that's not the case with the Americans. A lot more of a focus on the people, which contrast is not the case with the Americans. Yes, there is a lot more of a focus on smart mobility, again, more coming from an infrastructure, environment, and other perspectives. And given how European focus has been on the GDPR, on general data and privacy protection, the data security matters a lot. The data security is not what matters for the Americans first. That is, whatever individual data is, that belongs to either the private company or whoever is collecting that data. There are much less of those protections. Yes, there are some of those protections coming from California and a few other states, but at the federal level, there's no such privacy protection. There are a number of bills which have been under consideration. None of them have passed. Private sector companies would like to have a federal policy, but they are dealing with more of these state level, and they cannot deal with each of the state by state policy level pieces. So what does that mean in terms of the comparison? When you look at the United States, it's much more of a competition based, which means it's much more piecemeal across. Whatever a private sector can get in terms of partnership with the city government, that happens. It's not at the state level. It's not at the federal level. There's no such kind of, again, going back, policy which is across the board. So it's a much more market-oriented, much more decentralized approach with very little federal or state coordination. When we're looking at the European side, you do have a lot more of that, right? The EU is putting its footprint across the board. You do have a smart city policy, which kind of works across the board, which is not the case, again, if you look at it from a federal side, for the Americans, the National Science Foundation has a smart city initiative, more in terms of, again, competition, that whoever applies for that gets certain projects. It's in Europe, it's much more government-led, policy-led across at much different levels. Yes, you might have differences within the European countries themselves, but I would compare to what the Americans have a much more emphasis on the inclusion and equity. That, especially under the current administration, that is a no-no. And where I come from in Florida, that is much more of a no-no. In terms of the city models also, if you look at it, on average, American cities are much more spread out, low density, car-oriented suburban neighborhoods, which is why we see a lot more of those emphasis on Waymo and personal-driven vehicles. And these are very, very spread out. Miami itself is a spread out. Los Angeles is a quintessential spread out city. With all of these kinds of sprawl developments, what does that mean to have these sensors across? A lot of those then comes into how the transport infrastructure is using these technologies. It's not in any other big way. For European cities, it's you can see for across Europe, on average, it's more compact. Amsterdam is much more dense than Miami for sure. Shorter average distances, a lot more of emphasis on walking, healthy walking, right? We are, even in the last 3 days out here in Romania, that's what I'm seeing, much more of a walk, which is alien to us. And much more of the efficiency aspect in terms of those, not necessarily in the financial side. So coming into the innovation side, again, this could be an upside or a downside, depending on how you look at it. The Silicon Valley tech ecosystem and the venture capital is pretty much runs what the smart city is. It's a commercial enterprise. It's not a public enterprise. So in that sense, whatever is paying, that works, right? There are advanced mobility technologies which have developed because of that. The drones, for example, are supported by Amazon for remote delivery, and that's why a lot of that development is happening. The data analytics and AI implementation at scale, that also is happening mostly because of those private sector markets. It's not because there is a need from a public sector side. And also from a commercial side, it is much more of that, more of how you can scale those small solutions into big solutions. On the European side, you do have a lot more of the sustainability focus, right? That's not necessarily on only the ecosystem of what that tech infrastructure looks like. Robust kind of data privacy frameworks, as we were talking about, citizen-centered technology design, and even on the digital twinning side, I hear less of a conversation on that happening on the American side than on the European side. Although the potential for the twinning is a lot. And most of that focus is on the research side, not on the urban side. So key challenges from both sides, obviously smart cities are not cheap. It requires technology, it requires infrastructure, it requires change. AI is not cheap. We need to have very good infrastructure for that. These are not cheap in terms of consumption of electricity. They require a lot of electricity. That is potential for digital divide, although we see that divide both reducing and increasing across different kinds of technologies. Interoperability has been an issue across the last 30 years. It's not something new. Cybersecurity is, of course, a lot more growing, and that's one of my areas, which is for a different conversation, but that's a threat which has been stable, and data protection requirements are not as robust. So when we look at it in more kind of specific areas of how it is different between the United States and the European Union, it is that the United States is much more fragmented. It's each city by city. It's not a policy-wide. It's not federal. It's not state. European Union, more or less, again, given whatever the differences might be between between the countries and at the regional levels within the countries, there is a lot more of what that balance is with innovation, regulation, and so forth. So I'll just kind of conclude with some of the broad thoughts again, that smart city is more of a non-American phenomenon. It is European Union, it could be Asian, it could be Latin American, again, in different forms of whatever the smart city, smart means. And there are good reasons for that. United States has been a very advanced capitalist market, and that's how the federal government has worked. That's how the state government has worked. That's how even when the lobbyists from Silicon Valley go up to DC, they're all about deregulation. It's not about having any kind of a regulation unless their market value can increase, like those of having federal protections, federal privacy laws, rather than having states' privacy laws. And of course, there's much of a big difference in terms of the governance, that the American side is much more about competition and market forces, and what we are seeing on the EU side more broadly is on the coordination and equity side. All of this kind of says that no one shoe fits all. It's cultural, it's political, it's economic, it's responsive to whatever the local conditions are. And how that develops over the longer term would be interesting to see what that divergence looks like. So with that, we get started.